In a world obsessed with fame and perfection, their marriage seemed like a fairy tale. He was a global superstar, charismatic, talented, adored by millions. She was a celebrated actress, graceful, grounded, and admired in her own right. Together, they were the power couple of a generation. Red carpets, magazine covers, exclusive interviews. They had it all, except the one thing no camera could capture: truth. Behind the glamorous photos and dazzling smiles, something much darker was brewing. The cracks didn't show up on Instagram, the pain didn't leak through the filtered snapshots of their lives. But those who paid close attention noticed the silence between them during public appearances, the distant looks, the forced laughter. Something was wrong, and soon the world would find out. The unraveling began quietly. A single headline, a vague statement from their publicist about irreconcilable differences, and just like that, the image began to shatter. At first, fans were in denial. They were perfect together, people said, but perfection is often a mask, one we wear to survive in a world that demands we look happy, even when we're breaking inside. As the court filings surfaced, the story turned from heartbreak to shock. Allegations flew. Private arguments became public debates. Financial battles, accusations of betrayal, leaked messages, emotional interviews. The divorce wasn't just about two people separating. It became a mirror reflecting the cost of hiding pain for the sake of appearances. And yet amid the chaos, there was something deeply human in their story. It wasn't just about celebrity drama. It was about what happens when people forget to speak their truth, when we stay silent for too long, when we trade honesty for harmony, hoping things will fix themselves. But silence, when used to avoid conflict, only delays the inevitable. As the media frenzy intensified, both of them stepped away from the spotlight. She retreated into nature, sharing cryptic posts about healing and self-worth. He entered therapy, paused his tours, and spoke openly for the first time about mental health. Suddenly, what looked like the end of everything became the beginning of something real. Before we continue this story, take a second and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We share powerful real-life stories like this every week. Stories that don't just entertain, but make you reflect deeply about life, love, and truth. Because behind every headline is a heartbeat. Behind every divorce is a decision that didn't come easily. And maybe, just maybe, their story can help someone else avoid making the same mistake. The next chapter of their divorce wasn't about legal battles. It was about rediscovering who they were outside the roles they played for the world. And that's where the real transformation began. Away from the cameras, the real work began. Not the kind of work that gets applause or awards, but the internal, often invisible work of healing. For her, it started with solitude. No more red carpets, no more interviews. Just long walks alone, therapy sessions behind closed doors, and honest conversations with herself that she'd avoided for years. She realized how often she had swallowed her truth just to keep the peace. How often she had smiled when she was crumbling inside. How deeply she had invested in the image of a perfect marriage, even when it was costing her pieces of her own soul. And now, without the weight of pretending, she began to breathe again. Not because it was easy, but because it was finally real. He, too, began to dismantle the version of himself he had created for the world. The charming, always in control performer had been a mask. Underneath was a man who had learned to suppress emotion, to keep everything hidden, especially the parts of himself that felt weak. But the divorce stripped away that armor, and in that vulnerability, something powerful began to emerge. Their paths didn't cross for a while, each one focused on their own growth. But quietly, without any public announcement, something started to shift. Not between them, but within them. She found strength in setting boundaries. He found peace in facing the truth. And for the first time, both were learning how to live without pretending. The media had moved on to newer scandals by now. But for those still watching, this story was no longer about fame or fortune. It was about what it really takes to reclaim yourself after heartbreak. It wasn't the drama that mattered anymore. It was the resilience, the quiet moments of breakthrough, the ability to say, I deserve more than survival. I want joy. I want truth. And it wasn't just personal healing. Both of them started using their platforms differently. She began speaking out about emotional neglect, especially in high-pressure relationships. He started funding mental health programs for young artists, telling his story not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that even the most admired people can be suffering in silence. Their audience changed, from gossip seekers to truth seekers, from fans to followers who were ready to confront their own relationships, the masks they wore, the pain they buried, the patterns they repeated. This divorce had become something bigger. It wasn't just a personal ending. It was a cultural wake-up call. What happens when love becomes performance? When silence is mistaken for peace? When we choose comfort over truth? These were the questions their story left behind. And the answers, they were still unfolding. Because healing isn't a moment. It's a process. One that doesn't always look glamorous, but always reveals something true. Coming up next, we'll look at what happened when they finally spoke face to face. No cameras, no scripts. Just the raw, unfiltered truth that had been buried for years. They met in a quiet room, far from paparazzi, headlines, and flashing lights. No legal teams, no media handlers. Just two people who had once shared everything. Now sitting across from each other, older, more tired, but finally real. For a moment, there was only silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that holds weight. Memory, emotion, unspoken truths. He looked at her and said something simple. I didn't know how to love you the right way. Not as an excuse, not to win her back, but as a man owning the damage caused by his own emotional immaturity. She didn't cry, she didn't explode, she simply nodded, because she had known it for years. But hearing him say it finally brought a strange kind of peace. Then she said what had been buried in her chest for far too long. I didn't feel seen. I felt like a co-star in your life, not a partner in it. And just like that, the air shifted. There was no more blame, no more pretending, just two people facing the wreckage of what they once built, knowing full well they were both part of its collapse. It wasn't a reconciliation. There was no sudden rekindling of romance. It was something deeper, more rare. It was understanding. Two souls choosing truth over comfort. They talked for hours about the pressure, the fear, the roles they had played in each other's stories. And for the first time, they were no longer acting. What followed wasn't a dramatic twist. It was quiet healing. They didn't get back together, but they did begin to rebuild something that was lost long ago: respect. She respected his effort to grow, to face himself, to use his pain for purpose. He respected her strength, her voice, her refusal to disappear in someone else's shadow. Together, they redefined what it meant to part ways with love. No screaming matches, no bitterness, just closure. And from that closure came clarity, not just for them, but for everyone watching from the sidelines. Fans who had once idolized their relationship now started looking at their own lives differently. People began to ask deeper questions. Am I being honest in my relationship? Am I truly showing up, or just going through the motions? Have I silenced myself to keep the peace? This wasn't just celebrity gossip anymore. It was a lesson, a mirror, a moment of reckoning. When they walked out of that room, nothing looked different. No headlines changed, no tabloid scoops, but inside, everything had shifted. They were no longer trapped in the past. They had finally let go, not with anger, but with grace. And perhaps that's the most powerful kind of ending, the one that leaves no winners or losers, just two people finally free to begin again. In the final part, we'll uncover how this divorce sparked a ripple effect across the world, how it reshaped conversations about love, truth, and the courage to walk away with dignity. The world watched in silence as their final court appearance ended. No cameras were allowed, no public statements made. Just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who had once vowed forever, now walking separate paths. But something was different. This wasn't just another tabloid breakup. This divorce had sparked a deeper conversation about what love means, about what honesty costs, and about how sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do. Social media didn't mock them this time. Instead, people shared their own stories about relationships that looked perfect on the outside, but were breaking silently inside. Couples started attending therapy, not to avoid divorce, but to avoid the slow, silent erosion that leads there. People talked more openly about emotional neglect, about sacrifice, about self-worth. This one celebrity divorce had turned into a global mirror, and people began to look. He later spoke in an interview, not to save face, but to speak truth. He admitted he had prioritized fame over presence, control over connection. He talked about how easy it is to get lost in the image of success while your personal life silently crumbles. I had it all, he said, except peace. His words didn't feel like damage control. They felt like a man trying to make his pain mean something. She, too, found her voice, not through press releases, but through action. She launched a foundation for emotional wellness and healing, helping others navigate the quiet storms that never make headlines. People began to see her not just as someone's ex-wife, but as someone with her own power, her own identity. Her story became a roadmap for those trying to rediscover themselves after years of disappearing in someone else's world. Together, apart, they changed the narrative. And that's the real story here. Not just about love lost, but truth found. About the strength it takes to walk away, not out of anger, but out of respect for your own growth. Not to punish, but to protect peace. This wasn't a failure, it was a transition. And transitions are often the most honest parts of life. The world saw that endings don't have to be ugly to be real. That maturity isn't about staying no matter what, but about knowing when something no longer serves who you're becoming. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, am I being honest with myself in my relationships? Am I staying because it's familiar, or because it's truly nourishing my soul? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to keep holding on. It's to let go with grace. If this story moved you, if it made you think, then take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We bring you powerful stories like this every day. Stories that don't just inform, but transform. Stories that help you see your own life more clearly. And remember, endings aren't always failures. Sometimes they're the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be.